you.
Okay.
Hi, Sean. So before we get started, let me just say thank you all for joining. This is Circle of the Dark Mother, our monthly meeting for April. And we are really proud to have Oberon Zell here to talk about Gaea, I believe. So welcome, thank you. Just a little housekeeping. We do meet every first Sunday at 6:30 p.m. It's always online via Zoom. It's through Witch Lab, which is a local store, so you can find our meeting events there, or come to our website. And however you found us this time, that's how you can find us again. Next month, we will be doing a live reconstruction of a Sumerian ritual at Witch Lab, but I will be broadcasting it as well. So you know, you can join remote, local, however. And I don't know, Richard, if you wanted to say anything before we turn it over to Oberon, since.
Sure. Yeah, I've been part of this group for almost 2 years. I've been initiated through this group. I'm a student of Oberon Zell's. I'm a member of the Great School of Wizardry as a student. I've done many travels to meet with Oberon, and he actually handfasted me
Awesome.
about 3 or 4 years ago, which was an extraordinary experience. And then we parted ways, and now I've met the love of my life, and we are now living in the mountains of Pennsylvania. So my adventure continues as a wizard and as a practitioner. As a student of life, here I am, and I wanted to bring someone special to me, with me to this group, just to where everyone else could meet this wonderful human being. He has impacted my life since I was a young teenager. He's impacted my spiritual growth. That's kind of led me to where I am today, in a lot of facets, which later on helped me develop my connection with my own personal spiritual path. So I'm glad he's here, and be glad to listen to what he has to say. So thank you.
Yep. Glad to see you again, Richard. It's always nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right.
Hey, Oberon, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Oh, well, all right. I that's fine. I'm hoping that this will be more of a discussion than a lecture per se, and that I figure that everybody's got some things to say about the mother. This is a Circle of the Dark Mother, after all, and you know, and I'm all about Gaia, but also all aspects of the goddess. Always have been. When I was, I guess my first introduction to the Dark Mother was when I was a little kid, and so my very earliest reading was children's versions of the Greek myths, and one of the very first ones that I read that I remember very well was the story of, as they put it in the Roman names, Pluto and Proserpina, or as we often prefer to say, you know, Persephone and Hades, and so on. And so that was kind of an introduction there, although it was done in a very little kid kind of a way, you know, where the characters were portrayed sort of as children, which seems odd these days. I want to go back and try to find that original text and see just exactly how they managed that. But that put my foot in the door of meeting the gods and goddesses, and I've never turned back. You know, it's just kept on going, an amazing journey, and it's an infinite journey. It just goes on through, you know, time and space, and in myths and legends and just everything. So my whole life has always been dedicated to that, and certainly my connection with the mother, you know, while that may have been an early instigation, I always had a deep connection with nature, and I spent most of my time as a child out in the woods, hanging out with the critters, and I'd sit up in trees and watch the birds build their nests and lay their eggs and raise their babies, and they just got used to me, and that was all a part of it. So I've always been in tune with nature, and of course, Mother Nature is the logical consequence. It's fascinating that Mother Nature and Mother Earth is the most universally recognized archetype on the planet. You know, I remember way back in the day when Disney used to have these true life adventure kind of movies and stuff. And they would always start with talking about Mother Nature. They would never talk about God. They would say, well, in the fall, Mother Nature paints the leaves with beautiful colors, or this and that about Mother Nature and so on. We're so used to thinking of that even margarine companies will invoke the name of Mother Nature as if everybody knows who she is. That's not nice to fool Mother Nature. This is really fundamental. When I was working years ago on sculpting my Millennial Gaea piece, which was completed in 1998, but something that I spent several years working on, I did a lot of work in a museum. There was an exhibit of Ice Age art that was touring at that time, and I had been avidly trying to replicate some of those Ice Age goddess images, particularly the Willendorf, which was the first one I was introduced to, ever since I saw their pictures. And all there were pictures early on, so it was kind of hard to do. And I made many attempts, many sculptures. In fact, that was really my very earliest sculpture that I actually tried to do, was of the Willendorf figure. And subsequently, I went on to do many more of the Ice Age goddesses, but it's part of our collection of goddesses. But I remember sitting in a museum in San Francisco, and there was this Ice Age art exhibit. Well, it was an exhibit of Ice Age stuff in general. I mean, the walls and ceiling were covered with beautiful replicas of the cave paintings, and there were exhibits of tools and weapons and flint knives and stuff. But in the middle of the whole thing was a small little exhibit. It was a little stand, with the glass case on top of it. It was 4 sides, and in each of the side was one of the different 4 little goddess figurines, replicas, not the originals, but they were very good replicas. And that really nailed me. So I showed up with a little folding camp stool and my clay tools and a box of Sculpey. And I just spent the whole weekend there, day after day, just sculpting. And, you're not allowed to take photos in the museum for some reason. They seem to feel that they own the copyrights on these things, which I think is outrageous, but that's another issue. But there was no rule against artists drawing or sculpting the pieces. So I sat there doing that all day, and people came by, and everybody who came by wanted to see what I was doing, naturally. And they looked over my shoulder as I was working on them. And it was very interesting, the different kinds of reactions that I got. It really was. Especially from women and kids. Men, by and large, totally ignored me. They were off looking at the weapons and the tools and all the rest of the masculine kind of stuff that was certainly the product of the men in those cultures and seems to still be the interest. But the women all stopped and looked. And there were basically several different approaches. The young girls would invariably look at that plump little figure and say, "God, I hope I never look like that." And that's what that was their reaction. The older women would smile and nod, and think that was pretty cool. The little kids would come by and say, "That's Big Mama. That's Mama," because probably looked a lot like their mama, I expect, And then there was a certain group of women who would come by, and they would be sort of resentful. "You're a guy. You're a man. What right do you have to be sculpting images of the goddess? The goddess is for us women only." These were the lesbian separatists, I guess. But I just went on ahead and continued to work. And this became part of our initial offerings for the Mythic Images collection when we learned how to make molds and stuff like that. And years later, I figured I'd learned enough of experience with this that it was time that I could work on the piece that I had been dreaming about. Because way back in 1970, it was a remarkable year for me. 1970 was the year of the first Earth Day on April 21st of that year. There was a total eclipse of the sun over St. Louis, where I was living. That's that spring. And this was the first time that I figured that with the total eclipse of the sun, this may be a significant enough occasion to get my consciousness altered with the magic chemical of LSD that I'd been wanting to try out for many years, but had always wanted to have exactly the perfect moment. Well, that seemed to be it, and it was. And it was very transformative. And that summer, I also got introduced to several books that were crucial. The White Goddess by Robert Graves and The Great Mother by Eric Newman. These were very profound. The Great Mother particularly had all these photographs of goddess figures and stuff. That was actually the one that really turned me on to the Willendorf piece more than anything else, and others as well. And so I was really primed. Now, I've been a dinosaur kid, so I was totally into paleontology and evolution and the history of life on Earth and cosmology and all that cool stuff. I used to haunt the museums, any museum, especially that had dinos in it, I was there. And I collected them. I collected the earliest dinosaur figures. I've actually have a name in the paleontology field for having sculpted the very first sculptural image of a feathered dinosaur. That's my little claim to fame there, but I think it's pretty cool. A little Deinonychus. Those were the ones that were in the Jurassic Park movies that they called raptors. That was just easier to say. They were actually Deinonychus. But Deinonychus was a human-sized dinosaur, highly intelligent, presumably socially adept. And since the first movie was made, we've learned that they're actually connected with birds and probably have that kind of intelligence. Now, if a little bird the size of a raven or a parrot could have an intelligence equivalent to a human child, imagine what kind of intelligence a dinosaur of that structure, model, bipedal, have hands, rotatable wrists, opposable fingers, pack hunting, social behavior, probably language to communicate. You're socially hunting, you got to be able to talk to each other. Imagine what kind of intelligence that might have had, and where the world would be now if that big rock hadn't fallen out of the sky 65 million years ago. By now, they would rule the galaxy. Where are we going to be in 65 million years? I mean, think of that. These guys would have had it. They were way ahead of us. Anyhow, all of that stuff culminated on Labor Day weekend of 1970, when I was invited to join a friend who was house sitting for his brother out in the suburbs. And it was a lovely, lovely evening. And I had my lady at the time, Julie, was there with me. And we decided this would be a great occasion to drop acid. And so we did. We had just been taking our first witchcraft classes as well that summer. It was an amazing summer. Took classes from Deborah Letter, who was the first little hippie witch in St. Louis, opened a store called The Cauldron. And eventually she had a store many years later. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was. But she died a few years ago, sadly. But she was my very first introduction, my first teacher of the craft, and my first mentor. So the first classes that we'd just taken were about seeing auras, which is a pretty good first class. That's a good thing to start off with. So there we were, lying on our backs on a trampoline in the backyard on a beautiful starry night out in the suburbs. Now, I'd grown up in the country, so I knew the stars and the constellations, and I could connect the dots, and I knew what they looked like. But Julie had grown up in the city where you never even see the stars. I mean, city lights completely blotted out, and she had no idea. So we're sitting out there, and I'm drawing lines to connect the dots of the star constellations and showing them to her. And the thing about acid is there's a thing called trails, that if you draw a line, it stays there for a little while. And, so it's great for drawing lines between stars. And so I was doing that. And I was holding my hand up and playing with the things and playing with the auras. And wow, this is really cool, looking at the auras. And I started, I did the Star Trek, live long and prosper sign, And then I'm moving my fingers back and forth, and I'm watching the auras between them kind of grow and attenuate and then separate. I thought, wow, that looks like a cell dividing, because that's what cells do when they divide. They kind of get to really close and they kind of start moving apart, and they get a little bit further apart. And finally, they become two separate cells. And I had this flash, this insight, and I took it back. I said, wow, I started off with just a single cell, a single fertilized cell, in my mother's womb that was a zygote. And then it replicated, it duplicated, it did it, stuff like that. But it's all the same stuff, because when a cell reproduces, it doesn't pop off offspring. It simply becomes the two new cells. It simply divides itself. So the same DNA and the same protoplasm is now in 2 places. It's like taking a pitcher of water and pouring it into a bunch of different cups. Still the same water, nothing changes there. And so I thought, wow, I'm made of something like 30 trillion cells, but I perceive myself as a single organism because I am. All of these cells all share the same DNA, the same protoplasm. It's all one stuff. It's just got made into a bunch of little compartments. And then that took me back to, well, and I came from my parents and they came back from a single cell and their parents went back to a single cell. And I started diving down the river of DNA through the generations and the generations going back and back and back, through all of my ancestors, through, the hominids and the apes and the monkeys and the lemurs and the, everything, all the way back to the very beginning of the very first cell that developed the capacity to reproduce itself and to pass on its DNA. And all of the life on Earth is a part of that. And at that point, I'm laying on our back, looking up at the stars in the sky. When you're in that position, you might as well be out there. It's not going to look any different if you're 100 miles up. You're still looking up out there at the stars on the bridge of the starship, which we are actually on the bridge of the starship. And I kind of, this time now, my mind and my vision is completely taken over. And I kind of turned around from outer space and looked back upon the Earth, floating beneath me in all of her blue and white splendor. And I saw life spreading forth from the seas, spreading forth across the land, all this continuum of the same continuum, the same life form, the same DNA, the same protoplasm as it created me, the same process. I realized that what we call evolution is simply the embryology of a planetary scale organism. But it's no different from from our own embryology and our own development. And as I'm looking down in this and kind of going, wow, she opened her eyes and she smiled at me and she said, now you know me. And even now, 53 years later, I can't recount that and say that without the tears springing to my eyes, because that changed my life. That moment changed my life. And I responded in the only way I could. I said, I will ever serve you. What else could I say? I managed that. So, when we were able to come back to consciousness, Julie and I went back in the house and recounted this whole story to Jim because she'd been there with me. I'd been spilling this all out. And he said, wow, you have now had the great revelation. I knew if I hung around with you long enough, you would have some kind of prophetic revelation, because that's the kind of a guy you are. I mean, I had already founded a church in a pagan movement. So this seemed like the logical thing, that I would have some sort of a vision. And I wrote it all up. I sat down and I spent the next week writing all the stuff down, from all of my knowledge, all of my studies, everything from my studies of paleontology and evolution and cosmology and mythology and the goddess lore that I had just absorbed from all these books and all of it. And I put it all together into a paper that I called Theogenesis, the Birth of the Goddess. And that weekend, that Friday, we had our weekly Church of All Worlds Nest meeting. And I came and I presented this paper. Now, this is the first time I actually delivered anything resembling an actual sermon to the church. We just weren't that kind of a thing, like most pagan groups or covens, we got together and hung out, but we didn't have any preaching kind of thing going on. We weren't much into that. But there it was. I had a preachment to present. And some people were blown away and loved it. And some people were very concerned that, well, now you're going to have some dogma that everybody's going to have to, believe in or something like that. I said, no, it's not like that at all. This is information, this is a vision. Take it as you will. Nobody's required. But then the paper I started, I published it in Green Egg. I sent copies to some of the other early pagan publications that were coming out, and it got picked up and spread, and it became huge. It like electrified the entire growing pagan movement, because in those days you could publish stuff in places like Green Egg, and everybody would read it. There isn't any single place like that now, but there was then. And I'm actually very, very proud of the decades of publication of Green Egg that I engaged in. Here's a few old issues, but it was a great place to put something. And a couple of years later, after that, after it had been spread and commentary was going all over the place, I got invited to be a guest speaker and the keynote speaker to the 3rd annual Gnostic Aquarian Festival conference in Minneapolis. And so there I went, there with all these people who were authors. It was Llewellyn sponsored it, so it was mainly their speakers were all Llewellyn authors, so that was an interesting way to introduce myself. And that was where I met Morning Glory. And my life changed again forever as I met the goddess in the flesh. When I was younger, my great heartthrob, media heartthrob, was Morticia Adams of the Adams family. I was totally in love with her, and I ended up marrying her because that was Morning Glory. She was absolutely the living embodiment of Morticia. And to do that, to be partnered with Morticia, I had to rise to the occasion and become a Gomez, which also changed my life and affected my life a lot. So that was our relationship for the 40 years we had, was a Gomez or Morticia. But after that, I made many goddess sculptures. I did many writings. I did many lectures and workshops, developed the Green Egg. It became quite spectacular. We moved to the West Coast, got involved in a hippie community, raised unicorns, had all kinds of adventures. And eventually, after sculpting many figures of gods and goddesses, mostly goddesses, I felt I was ready to take that vision that I'd had so long ago and make it a 3-dimensional figure. And so I did. And the result of that was the piece that I'm sure you all know, the Millennial Gaea, of which is on the cover of the book, because I finally got around after 50 years to writing the book that had been in the back of my mind all this time. And I'm very, very pleased to finally have it out there. It's my first book in hardbound, but it's also available in paperback. And I hope that everybody reads it because it's my gift to the entire pagan community. Everything is in there, all that stuff, including years and years of correspondence with James Lovelock, who came up with a very similar idea a couple of years later that became much more famous, his Gaea hypothesis, although he spelled it funny. But we enjoyed years of correspondence until he died a few years ago at the youthful age of 108, which is pretty impressive. I think he showed up at his birthday party and dropped dead. But I figure he had done a pretty good run. And he had just written another book. So, I've got some years to look forward to. I'm only 80 now. And so, if I can catch up with him, it'll take a while. But I'm all for it. I'm still having fun here and lots to do and more books to write. And that's basically the story. The Millennial Gaea figure has become the central masterpiece of my life's work and of our family business, Mythic Images, and is available now in 4 different sizes, from a little bitty, 4-inch size that fits on your dashboard of your car, which is pretty cool, to a great big, almost life-size 24-inch size piece. And I'm working on a full life-size piece, and eventually I hope to be even bigger because the more people who can see her in the more ways, the better it is. And she's been getting out there. Thousands and thousands of these have been put out there. She's now being carried and reproduced by Pacific Trading Company, which is the company that makes all those statues of gods and goddesses that you see in your neighborhood metaphysical store. They all come from Pacific Trading, and including by Gaea, which I'm very pleased about. I'm not so entirely pleased by the ripoffs that are beginning to emerge. You may have encountered some of these. There are other companies now putting out knockoffs of their own interpretation. And then, of course, there's the very amusing thing of the Disney film Moana, which featured as the culmination of the entire saga, my Gaea figure as the goddess of the island coming alive, and it's exactly the same. So much so that if you go online to look for Millennial Gaea, you will find some images of the Disney version, which also identifies her as my Millennial Gaea. And it's pretty wild. And of course, kids would come into the stores and would take a look at the Gaea that would be there, and they'd say, Moana, because they had seen the movie. So, there's, I suppose, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Mhm.
But there you are. Well, I've been going on for about a half hour now, and I'm not sure there's a whole lot more that I really need to say about this because, you all know who she is. You're all connected with the goddess. I did do a children's book recently called The Song of Gaea, which is gorgeous illustrations, big book, 8.5 by 11 horizontal book with gorgeous illustrations and great little text to read to your kids for their first reading. And I hope that everybody gets one of those. If you want to see it in another whole dimension, it's designed to work with 3D glasses. If you have the right kind of 3D glasses, which there's a little information in the back of the book on how to order them. But if you get them from me in person at a festival, I include a pair of them with it because that's pretty cool too. So, that's kind of my little story there. And I'm going on with other stuff, more books involved right now. My current book project, I've got 2 book projects underway. One of them is called History's Mysteries, and which is tales of things that happened that changed the world that most people don't even know about. And I've got quite a collection of those. And the other one is a handbook for my future parents, for which I'm collecting essays from people who might write a letter to their future parents in their next incarnation.
Mm.
You got to write a letter to them, and you got to write a letter to yourself. And that will be a good part of the book, although not all of it. There will be lots of other stuff as well. But this is how we can communicate with ourselves next time around. Stuff that many of us wish we could have gotten this time around. It would have been helpful. Or that our parents perhaps had gotten this information this time around when we came to them as changelings children, which so many of us experience being. Think of how many magical stories involve a kid who is a changeling. The Harry Potter being a classic example, but not the only one by any means. It's almost a standard trope in magical stories. So anyway, that's what I'm working on right now, and that's where I am. And I would like to invite anybody to enter the conversation for the next half hour.
Awesome, thank you. I know Richard had a question he posted in chat, so I'll let him go in a second, but I did want to just say thank you. Your dialogue about your experiences with dinosaurs, evolution, that's something that really resonates with me too. Something I've also pursued along with my spiritual path. I work, it's one goddess, but I work with Lilith primarily. But I had a vision of her saying, I am evolution, that I had to really sort of ponder. But when we think about it, as you said, evolution is about this, this life form of a world coming into being, and just fascinating. So thank you. Very, very good stuff.
Well, good. I'm glad you seized on that, because I think that's really one of the most important things. The book includes a chart I made, two of them. I don't think it's probably going to show very well here, but it's one of them. It shows the diagram of the evolution of all the life on the planet.
Wow.
And the other side of it that matches it shows the development of the cells in the human body into all the different kinds of tissues. And you can see that the diagrams are virtually identical.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
It's pretty cool stuff.
I just ordered your book, by the way.
Thank you. Good. Well, and please rate reviews and tell people about it. I really want the whole community to get this book. If there's one book of mine that people who, think well of me would like to see what I have to say, this is it. Tell everybody that. I've written lots of books and will write many more, but this one is the central message of it all. Richard, you had a question about the nature of the goddess? Unmute. There you
Now,
go.
can you hear me?
Now, yes.
Okay, great. So this goes in a couple directions. I've been part of a magical family. I'm initiated priest in Palomayombe. Connected with the raw forces of nature and the spirits of the dead and these kinds of things. But more along the lines of the transformation of how you embraced divinity through divine icon. Right. So we see that the female figure is the construction of our world. It is the life force that bear us to this coming world. Seeing communities grow from your visions and your dreams. How do you see the way that your perception of connections to nature and connections to the goddess have influenced and impacted oncoming generations? What do you see that has been similar, and what do you see that's changed?
Well, I think part of the core thing is that I don't make a distinction really between nature and the goddess and women. To me, all women are avatars of the goddess, living representations physically right there in front of us, at all aspects, maiden, mother, crone. Every aspect of woman is the goddess, an aspect of the goddess. That was one of the beauties of the goddess collection that we developed over the years. From my very first efforts to do a little sculptures of Ice Age figurines, we eventually developed a collection of something like 600 goddess figurines from around the world in all cultures and all times and all places. And Morning Glory would do these weekend workshops where people would come. They were open to men and women, of course, but mostly women who came. And she would invite them to go to the collection, which was exhibited in these big displays that I had, and find one that that spoke to them. And it was the fascinating thing was that no matter what they looked like or felt like or how they identified themselves, they could find themselves represented in one of those goddess images. And the realization that once upon a time or in some place or another, my form, my shape, my identity was revered, was divinity itself, was a representation of the very goddess itself. This is not a thing that guys do. Guys don't go looking at a bunch of figures of gods and look for one that looks like themselves. But women do this instinctively, and it's very interesting to see that. So the thing is that all of this is connected. The motto of the Gray School, as you know, Richard, is Omnia Vivanda Connexa. Everything is alive and everything is interconnected, which I think is the core message, not only of my own teachings and of the school, but the core essence of the wisdom of the ages. And you can say that phrase to any wise person, any shaman or medicine person of any culture, anywhere, and they will all say, yep, that's it. Because that is the core of it all. That with that one little phrase, everything is alive and everything is interconnected. And then that really is the whole point. And the more we study, the more we get into things that, it's like we look at things as if they're all like separate things, like all these separate fingers, those are all different ones. But if we go a little deeper, we realize they're all part of the same hand and it's all connected. And that's the way it all is. The deeper we go, the more the connections become evident and obvious to us. We're like mushrooms growing out of the mycelium. The mycelium is a single vast organism beneath the earth. And all the mushrooms, they may look like little separate things popping up, but they're not. They're all just fingers coming up out of this vast, entity. And to understand that, to develop a theology based on that, is to develop a theology of immanent divinity, which is part of why one of the very first books that inspired me, well, one of the most important ones, was Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, where the essential message is thou art God. And of course, we extend that to thou art Goddess, which is even more relevant, because we are all cells in this greater body. We're no more separate than the cells in our own body are separate. You know, I mean, they may run around doing their own things. The little white cells are hunting things to eat, and, you know, and all of them are doing their thing within the body, but they're all part of the same greater body, you know. And if we could get down to their scale, you know, I wonder whether they realize that they are part of a bigger body or not. They probably think they're just a bunch of independent little characters the way we think, but we're not, and they're not. So she is not only our mother, she is us. She's us in a greater extent, and we're part of that. And I suspect the connection goes beyond that. You know, I really do. I mean, there's the interesting question of how life came to Earth in the first place. As soon as the early Earth cooled down enough from the molten state that water could stay on the surface without immediately turning into steam, there was life in that water, single-celled life. But where did it come from? It had no time to emerge here, to grow here, to come from anything else. I'm sure it came with the water, and the water came from space. All of the water on Earth, all of it came from space. And we now know that water is the most universal substance and one of the most common compounds, and the first compound ever to form in the universe of two separate atoms. You know, the first one technically is helium, but that's just two hydrogens, so that doesn't count. But the very next compound is water, and it's older than the stars, it's older than the galaxies, and all water everywhere in the universe is all the same stuff. You know, the water on Earth comes all the time. It's still coming all the time. Comets and icebergs are falling into the Earth all the time, you know, and they just merge with the rest of the water, with the rest of the cycle. You know, you can take this glass of water and pour it into a lake or a river or an ocean. It just becomes part of that. It's all part of that. And we think that, well, we are separate beings. Yeah, sure. Just like this water in this jar is a separate thing from the water in some other jar. No, it's not. It's the only thing that appears to be separate are the containers, the vessels that contain the water. And that's what we are. But, you know, the thing about that is when the vessel is broken or when the water is poured out, it all just flows back to the ocean. Flows back to the ocean. Doesn't go away, just keeps flowing back, enjoys the cycle, and eventually it evaporates up into the clouds and comes down as raindrops, you know, and new rivers form and new cups are dipped out of the pools and the wells and water. It just goes round and around and around. And so do we. So to see life is that kind of a connection, and to make the equation between that kind of life, the metaphor of water, with divinity, spirit is like that. Spirit is a universal substance, a universal oneness. It's the quantum field. It's what underlies everything. And we are no more apart from that than the water in this cup, in this glass, is apart from the water of the cosmos. And I expect that when we get to other worlds and start looking in the water that they have, and we've now found there's water in every planet in the solar system and the moon, you know, it's everywhere. Even on Mercury, there's water we found. I expect we'll find life. And maybe it will be the same kind of life. Maybe we will find that we are connected on a greater scale, and that our planet is only a cell in a larger body, you know. And we will look at the galaxies themselves as larger beings comprised of trillions of cells, the same way we are. So when you start looking at things like that and you go deep, you know, the key element is connectedness. It's all connections, you know. And the pattern is, I've got a whole thing in my book about this. The pattern that we have now analyzed of the structure of the cosmos is not just a bunch of random stuff splattered all over. It's an interconnected web, a network. It looks exactly like the diagram or the analysis of the neural network in the human brain. It looks exactly like the network of mycelium that lurks just beneath the surface of the earth. You know, these are all networks to communicate information and to keep larger organisms in touch with themselves and each other. So, you know, we're all part of something greater. And the idea of us trying to distinguish ourselves as separate beings and say that we're not part of it, we're not connected, that is probably the greatest error of human psychology, philosophy, and theology, is that illusion of separateness. And this is what we have to overcome. And this, I feel, is why the pagan movement has emerged at this time. It's time for a growing religious movement that is not about separateness, not about distinguishing us special chosen people from everybody else who is non-believers and unsaved and all. The pagan movement is all about embracing the connectedness that we all have and sharing that and cherishing and relishing in the diversity that produces. So that was a long babble. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but you set me off.
That was every intention, because I know I've spoken with you several times about these things. You know, many times when we sat around a fire or drinking good mead or celebrating good stories of our lives, you know, it was one of those things to entice the conversations where people could understand on a little bit deeper level about not just the surface level of your connection, but how you've seen the world transform, how you've seen other people along the path that are going in the directions of your dreams or the dreams of others manifesting into reality. You know, I go to these festivals and these events, you know, and I get to hear all these wonderful stories from different people and the way that they celebrate their connection to divinity, all their different ways to celebrate life and their understanding and their stories and their mythos and their creation to connection to create another generation. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. So at the end, I had a question, but I'll ask you this now. Do you still have this available for people? I don't know if you can see this. It's your volume 1 through 18 that you gave me the first time I met you.
Yeah, somewhere I have a folder full of those, but I can, I have the master for it, so I can produce more anytime. But yeah, the very first issues of Green Egg were just initially single pages. It's just a little newsletter. It grew, obviously, into something much more spectacular over time. The current issue is online. It's been online for some years, but currently, the current issue is a number 182. This was number 88, you know, going way back, but it continues. It's the longest running magical publication ever, 182 issues over 54 years. Whew. It's pretty remarkable. And but the set of those early editions, right now I'm in flux. All of my stuff is in storage in Michigan, and while I'm searching for a new home, which will happen soon. It's going to happen. Exactly how soon, I cannot say, but it is going to happen. I will have a new home. And then I can start retrieving all of my collections and boxes and unpacking them and putting things back on the shelves where I have access to it again. And I've got numerous file cabinets full of archives and stuff of the entire history of the pagan movement over the past 60 years. So I look forward to having that all accessible.
If I can, I would like to promote a few things of yours.
Please, by all
Okay.
means, do so.
Yeah, please, Richard.
So there are circles and ceremonies. I'll have to readjust here. So this can be found on Amazon or through the Gray School of Wizardry, along with several others of his books, which I'm going to share with you here. There's Gargoyles, specific class that was geared towards the student body, but it's still an interesting thing to explore and look through.
Richard, just so you know, your video is frozen.
There's Dragon Lore.
I can hear you. Oh, nope. Oh, maybe it's me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can
okay.
hear you.
It's coming back.
Good.
Maybe it was me. I don't know if it was me or you.
I know this was
Oh,
definitely a love for Oberon, was the Wizard's Bestiary.
right. There's a second edition out now that has more material in it even.
And
So
this was one of the originals that I've kept in really good shape.
you have.
There's the Grimoire for the Princess Wizard.
Ah, yes. That was my first book. Yep.
And then there's the companion for the Apprentice Wizard. And again, that can be found on Amazon, and it can be found through the Grey School of Wizardry.
Yeah, these are the books that laid the foundation for the school itself. And I'm delighted to see that you've got them. And I be sure to keep getting them because I'm going to keep on writing books. Hopefully all of them will be significant in some way or another. At least I think so. Basically, my approach has been that I write the books that I want to read, that I want to have on my shelf and go back to. You know how there's certain books that you really treasure and you want to pull them off the shelf and read them over and over. Well, those are the kind of books I want to write, the ones that I feel that way about. And I'm pretty pleased so far that most people seem to agree with that. But I don't have the benefit of the kind of promotion that gets my books listed in the New York Times, review of bestseller books, which I would like to see happen, So, I rely on folks like y'all and other people who read and are fans of my work to, tell people about it, write reviews, spread the word. Otherwise, nobody will know.
Can I ask a question about just sort of, how do you see Mother Earth now? Things seem so dark. It seems like we're really doing terrible things to her, to our planet, to all of that. Where do you find hope? Do you think, I know there's also a sort of concurrent resurrection of, some interest in psychedelics, which I do think, those experiences can be really eye-opening for a lot of people if done properly the right way and all that. And I don't see everybody running out to, become a pagan or a witch or, whatever. Where do you find your hope, Oberon?
Well, for one thing, when you look at Gaia from the point of view of a complete organism, there's several things that stand out. One of them that you have to think about right away is what is our role in that? What is our position? What organ do we comprise? And certainly, both I and Lovelock early on said, well, we must be the brains of the system. That must be our job. And I think that was a bit of hubris there. Personally, I think that, and I have a chapter about this in the book, that if anybody might be qualified would probably be the whales to be the neural net of the brain, and possibly the mycelium and other stuff like that we're not really aware of, but we are part of the nervous system. But we have also, there has become a cancer, not all of us certainly, but humanity, whatever organs we may be, has developed a cancerousness in the planet. And that is a problem because cancer can be deadly. I know personally, having experienced it. And but then again, you look at another thing too, is plagues of all sorts have been with us from the earliest time. We've now recently found that some of the analysis of ice age remains has indicated that there were plagues running loose way back then. Not so severe, minor things like, colds and stuff. But greater plagues have emerged as civilization has emerged, including our current one. And I would say the most recent, but it's still going on. And these can be seen, I think, as antibody reactions. I think that the plague viruses can be seen as Gaia's antibodies, and their job is to attack the what is creating the disease, the plague. They are not the disease. They are the response to the disease. And I think that's something that we have trouble understanding. We look at these various plagues and we think, oh my goodness, Gaia is sick. Well, that's not it. That is a response to the sickness that we have inflicted. So the more of us that we can awaken, the more of us that we can bring into a better consciousness to understand and take care of her, I mean, the better it will be. And that is growing. That is growing tremendously. The pagan movement is long been considered the fastest growing religion in the Western world, and it's becoming one of the largest and very significant. And it's starting to develop in other countries as well, as people freed of the yoke of the church and governments are starting to want to reclaim their own traditional heritage and going back to their own pagan roots, which we all have. Every culture in the world has its pagan roots. So if they start digging into their own roots and their own ancestry, well, they become part of the system that connects with the mother, because that's where all the roots connect. They all connect to her. So I have I've been watching this for a long time. Like I said, I'm 80 years old, so I've seen a lot of stuff coming and going over the years. And I've seen generations over the last 60 years that I've been involved in this. I mean, it was over 60 years ago that we started the Church of All Worlds, and I've seen 3 generations growing up in that time and bringing their own kids up in it. I've seen festivals grow from a handful of people to huge numbers. I've seen metaphysical shops grow from a few to thousands, and in communities and groups and stuff happening everywhere. We are part of an emergence. And I think that is a really important part of it to understand, because that's how evolution works. This is how the whole pagan movement works. This is a movement that was not founded by some single founding prophet. It's not because somebody wrote a book, and browbeat other people into following it. It's not like that at all. This is emerged. The term grassroots is very apropos, I think, from this. It arises spontaneously from the experience in the heart of the people themselves. And that gives me great encouragement. And our kids give me encouragement. Our kids are amazing. The kids that we see when we go to these festivals, oh my goodness, that's why I'm inspired to do this book for the next generation. I want to grow up in this community. What it's going to look like decades, now when it's my turn to come around again on the guitar, I want to grow up in it. So I want to make sure this community is thriving, so I'll be able to grow up in it. And I want to be sure there's an instruction manual out there to tell people how to raise kids like us, because there will be whole new generations of us coming around. And hopefully it will be useful to those who are raising the kids right now as well, of course, obviously. But these things encourage me, and the discouraging part, that's always been there. But we've had inquisitions, we've had wars, we've had plagues, we've had catastrophes and cataclysms and volcanic eruptions that have nearly exterminated humanity. Whole civilizations have arisen and fallen, and we're still here. We keep coming back like crabgrass, generation after generation. We keep coming back, and we recognize each other, and we recognize that we're here for it. People often ask me, as a wizard, they'll say, well, Mr. Wizard, tell me, what should I be doing with my life? And I'll say, you should be figuring out what you're here for and then do it. So that's the message I want to put out for people. Figure out what you're here for and then do it. What else you got? We have a few minutes.
That was really cool. So Richard had a question in chat again. Richard, do you want to?
Oh, here, let me go down to the chat.
Good questions, Richard. So no negative there.
Okay. So in response, the Church of All Worlds, that has been a growing interest for several young pagans that I've communicated with. You know where I've networked and communicated with and all of these things. But I've had a lot of young people and even some older people interested in the Church of All Worlds. And they're very interested in how it actually functions, how it works. Do you have any connections with that as far as websites, or what could you share with people to where they could find out about how to get involved with the Church of All Worlds?
Well, at this time, I think the most productive place is to go to the Facebook page. CAW has a Facebook page. Just look it up there, Church of All Worlds Facebook. Also, Green Egg carries a lot of stuff about it. And we're in the process of of kind of upgrading the whole system. You know, we still have, you know, but it has a website. Church of All Worlds has a website. It's got all kinds of useful stuff there, including all of my books and lots of material. But for your practical day-to-day life, you know, it should be revolving around a nest, to get together with a small group of people and meeting on a regular basis to share this stuff, kind of like a coven thing, but not necessarily for the focus of doing magic per se, but for the focus of sharing our lives and experiences. A nest meeting always starts with sharing of water, passing the water around everybody and say, well, may you never thirst. May you always drink deeply. You know, that kind of stuff, because water shared is life shared, quite literally. Life shared not just with the people in the circle, but life shared with all life in the cosmos. So that would be my recommendations. Just tell people to check out the Facebook page and the website, and we'll pick it up from there. I've got to get back to working on some major upgrades of our a lot of stuff, since I've shifted my attention from the Gray School now that I retired as headmaster and have passed that mantle on to my very worthy successor and protege, Headmaster Nicholas Kingsley, and he's carrying forth there. I'm still there. I'm still teaching. I'm still on the board and stuff like that, but I do no longer have that primary responsibility. So I'll be able to turn that more to the church and more to my writing and other work. But first, I need a new home. So that's what I'm working on right now.
So you're saying you have a little bit more free time, because I understand with communications with you that being headmaster is quite an endeavor. There's quite a lot to undertake. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of communications. So I'm happy to hear that you're able to enjoy your years and can do what makes your heart happy.
Well, that's the idea. You know, I've been doing the Gray School for close to 20 years. If you consider the work on the grimoire as the beginning of it all. And I'm very happy to have brought up somebody that I can pass it on to. You know, there's nothing more wonderful to create something and then be able to pass it on to other people who will carry it forward. Whew. You know, how many things end with the creator? You know, when the creator is gone, then that's the end of it all. So I'm very, very pleased and very proud of the work that Nicholas is doing here. So, but yeah, it's very time consuming. Doesn't leave a whole lot of free time. So there.
I definitely have interest to be part of that dream of the future as well.
Well, wonderful. Well, I expect I'll be seeing you at festivals this summer, as always, and we'll sit around the fire and share mead and feed and weed and screed and great conversations.
Thank you. So I know we're running out of time. So any last questions or anything anybody wanted to say before we close? I want to say.
I just want to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go.
I just want to say that thank you for that beautiful sculpture. She has been with me on my altar since I think 1997 or 98. She's beautiful. She inspires me every day. And you have, you know, you've done so much for our community, and it's a really beautiful piece of work. And thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure. One is glad to be of service, as we say.
And I wanted to say thank you so much for being here with the circle, with giving us your beautiful insights and knowledge and experience. Definitely we'll be pursuing more of your books. Richard will post on our Facebook page the links and such, so we'll take a look at that. And you know, you're always welcome if you ever want to come back and talk again. So thank you so much. And thanks to Richard for pointing you toward us.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Mark. And I'm glad to have been here. It's been delightful to hang out with you guys. Okay.
You too. Beautiful, beautiful words and insights. Thank you so much.
All right. Blessed be.
Blessed be. Okay, well, thank you all. I'm going to close this out and stop the recording. It will be on our YouTube channel. We will, as I said, next month be doing a live ritual at Witch Lab, but we will do it online too, because I know people can't always be in person. And I will record it, and we'll see if I post it or not. Sometimes rituals, I decide not to, but we'll see. So thank you all. Take care. Have a blessed time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.